Hello, and may the 4th be with you. Welcome back to the Gnomon live stream. I'm your host, Adam Hartzell. I work as a concept artist in the gaming industry, and I'll be your host today for our May the 4th special event. And before I introduce our artist and we get into a lot of the really cool Star Wars related stuff we're going to be talking about, I'd like to first thank tonight's sponsors, Lenovo and AMD. Thanks to their generous sponsorship, we're able to provide live streams, educational content, a lot of Gnomon's programming that we do for free. We're able to continue providing that for free for you. So we're really glad you're here. And with that, I'll also remind you that if you're in need of closed captioning, if you watch today's stream on Facebook Live or on our YouTube channel, you can get access to closed captioning there as well, live while the stream is running concurrently. So I'd like to introduce tonight's guest, Alex Nice, who is a senior illustrator and art director. Alex is an entertainment industry veteran with over 20 years experience of creating high-end visuals for film and television. As a member of the Art Directors Guild, Alec works in studio art departments as a senior concept illustrator, collaborating with directors and production designers to visualize scripts at the beginning stages of production. Originally trained in fine art and illustration with a strong technical focus in 3D, Alex spent the first 10 years of the industry as a post-production VFX CG generalist and matte painter. He went on to become art director at Magnopus, working on multiple film and VR productions for clients including Disney, Lionsgate, Facebook and Oculus, and NASA, before moving on to film pre-production design in 2015. And with that, I'd like to say, Alex, welcome to the stream. It's great to have you here.
Hi, everyone. Happy Star Wars Day.
Yes, happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you, sir. I really enjoyed actually reading your bio, introducing you, because I think we actually could talk about a lot, and you've got some really cool stuff to share with us. We're going to be talking about your art, you're going to break down some stuff that you have done for a Star Wars project that you worked on, hence today's theme. But before we get into that, it is May the 4th. I feel like a little bit of nerding out is in order.
Okay.
So I had a couple of questions for you before we get into your origin story as an artist. I wanted to ask you, kind of how has Star Wars played a role in inspiring you as an artist? At what point in your life did you become acquainted with it? And kind of what's your connection to that outside of the industry work that you've done?
Oh, man. I think my first Star Wars film was Empire Strikes Back in the theater. So that ages me a little bit.
That's a good one to start with, man. That's a good one.
I think that I had Star Wars figures, playing on the beach, losing them in the sand,
yes,
my childhood, all the way through. And so, I mean, it's integral into us 80s kids. Like Star Wars was the most amazing thing, science fiction thing that you could get into. And it was, I don't know, it's like part of us, a lot of us, it's like,
absolutely,
it's like a religion, which it is almost,
Yeah, and I think like a lot of us, and and I know that we're generational peers and a lot of other peer groups that I've talked to working in the industry, like we almost forget that Star Wars is the influence that it is because we just absorbed it at such a young age. It just became a part of reality for us.
Absolutely.
But it is a very specific design language. And a lot of times you think you know what Star Wars is, but you really have to like delve into that, which absolutely. I'm sure that you've had to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of people, Star Wars defined a look that everything changed after that. Before that, it was so like 1950s kind of hokey and all that stuff. And it really was like, it started at that point, the modern sci-fi. And it's like, I mean, its design language is iconic, right? It's something that we've had for, 30 years now, 40 years now. And it's like, it's still there. It's part of it. It's like part of, I would say it's part of American culture now at this point, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, I've lived overseas and like maybe not every corner of the earth, but like most places you go on the planet, you can find a Star Wars nerd to talk with. Yeah, they're out there for sure. Yeah. When I've got some of Ralph McQuarrie's books behind me, the concept artist, illustrator for Star Wars, who really invented that like lived in look that we'd never seen. For a future before. But Ralph was also like one of the OG, I'll say one of, because he had some peers, but one of the OG concept artists that I think really set the tone that the things that you and I are working with day to day are still being influenced by his work.
I mean, he's the master. He is Star Wars, right? Like everyone says that it's George Lucas, and yeah, it's George Lucas, but it's almost like you want on the cover of those Star Wars movies to be like George Lucas and Ralph McQuarrie, and maybe Joe Johnston also brings you Star Wars, right? That's the
Absolutely.
Those are the trifecta of the design language, I think. So
Definitely.
great.
Yeah, and I can attest to the same story. I have Star Wars action figures that were casualties of childhood. As nice as I wanted to keep them, I always had to open them and play with them, and then
Now there's worth so much money now too.
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. But they always wind up like on the roof or buried somewhere, and then you forget where you buried it. You've got to try to go find it. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about I want to get into your origin story a little bit. So, and my questions aren't meant to probe for like the definitive answer on things, but what are some of your earliest memories of being influenced and inspired towards art? What are some of those touchstones for you?
I think it starts with comic books. My dad had a stall at a flea market in the Bay Area where I grew up, and there was a couple stalls down. There were guys selling comic books, and I was in that kind of like, that point in comic books when they'd have like 5 different versions of covers for X-Men and everything. And I was just like doing chores to make money, mowing lawns down the street so that I could purchase comic books, because it was almost like an obsession. And, I have boxes and boxes of my old comic books in storage. And I think it was I drew my entire life. I was kind of like in the grade schools, I was kind of like a lonely kid, and I always had the sketchbook or drawing on the homework rather than doing the assignment. And what do you call it? So I would just collect comic books. And then I think at the point when Todd McFarlane came out with Amazing Spider-Man was when I really got into like really being serious about drawing. And it was the Todd McFarlane's Spider-Mans of like, all the detailing that he did is like comic books where the way that he did his imagery was so cool. And that was like, I would just kind of copy images from those books. And then there was a comic book store in the Bay Area called Flying Colors, and they would put the comic book art on the wall if they allowed it, right? If you brought it over there. And so me and my best friend would like try to do Spider-Man drawings and try to get it on the, get ones that would go up on the wall, and we would eventually do that. And there's kind of like a competitive aspect to it. So that's kind of the background of when I started doing drawing. And then, I never really stopped at that point at all. Like I always was kind of like that artist kid with a sketchbook, drawing and comic books and doing my own comic books. And I did that all the way into high school. And then during high school, I started tattooing people also. So we had like a prison gun, and we were like tattooing. I was tattooing people all over the place and kind of walking around and just, going to different parties and doing horrendous tattoos on people. And
talk about no Control Z. Like when you're tattooing, that's it.
I'm sure there's some people that wish there was Control Z there.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I've just been that art kid. And then I think around, I don't even remember the year. I can't remember exactly, but there was a point when I was in junior college, and my best friend, my best friend who, we did comic books together and everything. He ended up going to the art academy in San Francisco. And then I ended up following because I saw what he was able to do when he was doing those like professionally trained courses. And then I don't think it ever stopped after that. Like I'd always been just kind of doing that. That was my one saving grace. And otherwise I'd probably be out, I don't know, fixing air conditioners or something.
Yeah. And so, we have, I think we have similar origin stories. How did you, so this love of comics, and I would say even like during that time, I would guess, I don't know if I was in a different part of the country, so maybe it wasn't this way in the Bay Area, but like at school, like at junior high school and at high school, the public school system hadn't really caught up yet with the notion that like comics were like straight up art. Like if you wanted to learn art, you're going to go draw comics. I remember I had an art teacher tell me like, yeah, I don't think you understood the assignment. Like maybe you should just draw comics. And it was almost like treated like this sub art form.
Oh, I had them taken away. Teachers would take them away from you. You'd have, they were in my schools, at least, like, that and garbage pail kids, they were like, not at all. And so,
absolutely.
You felt like, you were like that bad kid with this backpack full of like paraphernalia that you really, that wasn't allowed. And it was, those comic books were violent, right? They were or they weren't that violent, but they were, they would had adult themes or whatever, and so
Sure.
a lot of kind of touchy teachers and stuff had problems with them.
Yeah. No, I think if people get worried about like things being strict now, like I think when we were growing up, it was like it was just deviant. Like if you were into all of that stuff, it was just like, oh, well, you need to get serious about life because you'll never get a job because you know how to play video games and care about what comics look like. And like that's like literally what I do now.
Yeah,
do a job doing those
right
things.
now it's a legit career.
Yeah, exactly. So how did you get from, so you have this love for this 2D medium, and I mean, comics are a great place to find that because the draftsmanship to be able to produce that level of art in a 2D medium is through the charts. How did you then start to pick up a love for 3D and pick up those skill sets?
So it was interesting. My parents, they split up when I was young, and I stayed in the kind of like the suburbs of the Bay Area. But my mom went off into Marin in a company called Autodesk, which we all know now.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So she was there when they had just they were selling like a very early version of AutoCAD and the very first version of 3D Studio before there was even 3D Studio Max. So I would go to my mom's on the weekend, and I went to her work a few times, and she would get me copies of 3D Studio, which was crazy. And I'd run this old software on really weak computers and just kind of learn, like actually do the tutorials from these tutorial books that were this big during the summer, because I would spend my summers there. And so I'd have this box of like 3D Studio version 2, and then I'd pull out that tutorial book and I would just do it. And if I remember right, I was trying to copy the effects of Lawnmower Man, which had come out around that time. And so that's when I started doing the tutorials, and I had gotten a really rudimentary understanding of 3D at such a young age. Like we're talking like before high school, just playing around with these 3D programs. And I was even using the 2D spline tools in 3D Studio, splines to not make 3D objects, but to make 2D drawings. So I would draw with the splines and make images and just show my mom on the monitor like what I had done with those splines. So yeah, I've always been around that software, which was really, really cool. And but only on the summer. So then I'd go back home and then not really use it at all, and then come back and use it a little bit. And so I played with it at a very rudimentary level growing up. And then as I got when I was in junior college, there was a class that offered 3D Studio, which was now called 3D Studio Max. And I took that class, and that's when I got, really acquainted with the software.
Yeah, that's amazing, because how fortuitous, like the right place at the right time. You were like at practically ground zero.
Yeah, when 3D was like crazy new technology. Yeah, for sure. Well, I have some really old stuff that's hilarious, old images back in those old days.
I wasn't in it as early as that, but I know from talking to peers that were, and yourself included, I would think it's the same. In those days, it was like brute force anytime you wanted to figure something out and learn something, because you literally just had to be like, I want to make this thing, and I don't know how to get the software to make that thing. So you just kept trying and failing and trying and failing until you find the way to do it.
That's what it was. There was no information out there at all, except a big dictionary-sized book that was very cryptic, and you would just kind of do stuff and trial and error. And it was just playing around. Like I was really a 2D artist that was just having fun with this stuff. And, I'd get bored after a couple hours, but I did, get my footing on that really early, which was a kind of a real blessing.
So that's pretty cool. You had this very fortuitous time in your life where you got exposure to this stuff, you started getting into it. When did all of this kind of, at some point, I would imagine these paths start converging and you start thinking about this as something that you want to do professionally?
Yeah. So, I was in the Bay Area, just kind of being a punk kid, doing, giving tattoos and, I was misbehaving, I should just say. And then I took a class at a junior college in the Bay Area called DVC. And that was a 3D Studio Max class. And there was like 10 people in there using these super weak computers, like doing software. And then at the end of the class, again, with my friend, we really got into it. And I have no idea how I did it, but my final was like a 3-minute animation. And in those days, that was insane to, even render, be able to render 3 minutes. Like it took like 2 weeks to render, and it wasn't good, but it was a long, complex animation about an alien and all this stuff. But at the end of the class, the teacher actually pulled me aside and said that he had a friend who was looking for someone who was proficient in 3D Studio, and they wanted, and what they did was they took animations in 3D Studio Max, and those animations were for big like trials, like jury trials. And so my first 3D job was doing animation for big trials, which is like airplane accidents, train accidents, car accidents, and dealing with a lot of these like gruesome incidents and showing animations to the juries how they could visualize what was the causation of the accident. Yeah. So
no, that's not the first time that I've heard that there was this niche for a time where like courtrooms needed 3D artists.
Yeah.
And they were like, we don't know how to do this, but we need somebody to do it.
And it was super exciting. You know, I've been working at pizza parlors and coffee shops the whole time, and to be like, and then suddenly I'm like making animations that are being shown on 60 Minutes and CNN, and then this is just, I'm 20 years old or 19 years old or something, and it's like it was so cool to be able to do that. And even sometimes we did productions where we would shut down an intersection in like San Francisco with the police, and then we would set up those new HD cameras, which were these big bulky cameras in the you know, big rig trucks, and we would do full film shoots, and then we would composite 3D on top of that, using like so many early tools that were, you know, it was like a little production studio for like with like giant $1 million cases, and I was just sitting there. It was great. It was really cool.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool. So we're gonna, in a moment, we're gonna be taking a look at some stuff that you did for the Star Wars franchise,
Sure.
which I don't want to give any of that away just yet. So I realize we're talking about a long span of time, so this is going to be a little bit of a montage reel, but can you fill in the gaps on going from visualizing in 3D for courtrooms to working on Star Wars? Like,
Sure.
what was that road like?
The condensed version. Yeah. So I did the airplane car accident thing for about 5 years. And at the same time, that was paying for my schooling in San Francisco. So I was paying a lot of my way through schooling. And then I got offers to come down to Los Angeles at a little studio called Sway Studios. And Sway Studios did mostly car commercials. But the interesting thing about that studio was that they were using Digital Domain's V-Ray pipeline. So there I got hired as a CG generalist to do these kind of car commercials. So it's like, you know, these Nissan and Honda and Toyota commercials. And then they were using the Nuke pipeline with the AOVs and the compositing. And I got familiar with the you know, a professional film studio or a VFX studio's pipeline there at Sway Studio. And the funny thing was I was flying down for those jobs and paying my own hotels down there. So they said, you can hire here, but we're not paying for your hotel. So I'd get these hotels down in like, you know, in Compton or something. And like,
yeah,
I would commute to the studio to get paid enough so that in the end, I ended up paying more to be there than what I was making, because I was getting paid so little. But the training there was so good that it was totally worth it. So that's where I really learned the entertainment industry pipeline for visual effects. And then from there, a contact got me into my first film, which was 2012, and by Roland Emmerich. And on 2012, I was a CG generalist there, and so we did a lot of modeling, made the casinos for Vegas and everything like that. But my real goal, my career goal at that point, was to be a map painter. I wanted to be a map painter since art school, and I knew that's something that I really wanted to do. So I asked to transfer there, and the studio, like, what do you call it? What was the name of? Can't remember the name of the studio right now off the top of my head, but they allowed me to transfer into the map painting department. And there, under one of my friends, which is Ivo Horvat, which is an amazing 3D map painter, he kind of trained me in how to do 3D map painting. And this is like that perfect position where it used all of my 3D generalist skills and my 2D painting skills, because at art school I trained for fine art and illustration, and it combined all that for map painting. And then I was a map painter for the next 5 or 6 years.
Awesome. And then
painting. I went on to from there after I think the last film that I had worked on was Oblivion as a map painter, and then I went with Ben Grossman, who was visual effects supervisor on Hugo, which won an Academy Award. And he brought me along with him to form a studio in downtown LA called Magnopus. And there we did a lot of like new age media, like VR and AR, and also like a lot of the like in-camera biz dev stuff, like all these kind of new technologies. And so at Magnopus, I was art director there for about 3 or 4 years. And then from there, I got a call to work on a movie called Underwater, which Fox came out a few years ago. And they offered to sponsor me to get into the Art Directors Guild. And then so I left the art because I've been trying to get into to the union for about 10 years. When I got into there, they sponsored me to get into the union. And ever since I've been working in pre-production as a concept illustrator. So using a lot of those map painting skills, those CG generalist skills, those are all, working perfectly in the pre-production design field also, which I love.
Yeah. And it's a unique story, but it's also a common tale. Like, I think you've got a lot of young artists these days that are they want to be concept artists, and they're like trying to focus on this one thing called concept art. But so many concept artists that have sort of sustainable careers are people that have learned how to do a bunch of different things.
Oh, I'm a big proponent of that.
All of that together. Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of keeps your work also from looking like everything else.
Absolutely.
That's out there.
And you're not afraid to try, once you learn, the more things you take into your toolbox, you end up using those. And it's great to be a generalist for all those things, because it can lead to a lot of other great opportunities, because maybe you'll get tired of doing concept art at some point. Maybe you want to do modeling or animation or all that stuff. So it's really great to learn as much as you can when you can, because it's such a it's been so useful to me. I very proudly say that I'm a jack of all trades but a master of none. So that's kind of like my niche.
Yeah, but I think there's also that realm where I think when you develop that breadth, it gives you the ability, if you need to zoom in on something really specifically, you can develop expertise, or at least high level functioning in that discipline pretty quickly, because you spent so much time learning so many different things. It's like you know how to learn fast, and I think that's a really important skill that all my friends who have backgrounds as generalists, they can all do it. It's like they just learn super quick. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm not afraid. I mean, and it comes in handy when I like to say it's like a mindset almost, right? Because Unreal Engine is what everyone's talking about now, and it's like, you're a CG generalist, or if you're a generalist and you know this stuff, you can jump right into Unreal, and all the same concepts that you learn in these other programs apply in Unreal. And then, so when I was on the film John Wick, I used VR for a big set in that film. And then I'm putting the director and Keanu Reeves into VR, and they can walk around in these environments that I've designed. And these are all opportunities that come because I don't have this pigeonholed view. I'm like, okay, something new I can learn. Let me learn it. I'll figure it out and then get it done, Yeah,
I think I think there's a great argument to be made for that breadth of varied skill sets that might seem like they don't interrelate, because concept designers at the end of the day are problem solvers. And you can solve problems knowing how to use maybe a hammer and a screwdriver extremely well, or you can solve problems knowing how to use the entire toolkit. But maybe you're not a virtuoso with that hammer, but you know when to use the hammer, you know when to use the other thing too. Cool. Well, I can't wait now to jump in to looking at some of the stuff that you're going to show us. And I think that was the perfect setup for what we're going to see, because I've had kind of a sneak peek at the presentation you've set up today. And it's I'll let you say what project it's for. Before we jump over to that, I want to say we're seeing the questions come in on the chat from our viewers. Please don't stop. Keep asking your questions. What we're going to do is my co-pilot, who's handling kind of the production side of the stream, is going to capture those questions and feed them to me. And we're going to take our last half an hour or so of the stream and just address questions. We'll do it that way, because you might find that you ask a question right now that Alex actually answers in context of what he's going to be talking about. So we'll get to the ones that are still left there to be answered. So Alex, I'm going to kind of jump into the sidecar here. I'm going to hand you the mic, and maybe you can kind of set up for us what we're going to be looking at today.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I mean, hi everyone. Again, I'm Alex Nice. I'm a concept artist in the film industry. Today, I was asked to kind of show some of the work that I've done for Star Wars. So I worked on in 2020. I worked on the film Obi Wan. So I've thrown together this slideshow to kind of show some of my work, some of the tools that I use, some of my processes. It's not going to be completely cohesive because I kind of threw this together last minute. So let me know if you have any questions. Definitely put it in there, and then I'll break it down. So today I'm going to cover some of my process, some of the tools that I use, and some of my design tasks. I'm going to keep it completely general. Also, before I get started, I want to say that the design work that I did for this project was the result of the collective effort of many more talented artists than I am. So a lot of the work that I'm showing here today was first sketched or conceptualized by the talented guys over at Lucasfilm Art Department. All those guys are the real deal. They're also some of my favorite artists like Andre Whalen, Brett Northcutt, and Anton Grandert. Those guys are those, and obviously Doug Chang also. So just know that they are behind most of the work that's on here. So with that out of the way, this is a presentation on Obi Wan, and I was invited to the project in 2020, and I designed the work that I did was under the production designers Sean Haworth, Todd Cherniowski, and of course Doug Chang. And as mentioned before, I work in the union, so I worked outside of the Lucasfilm Art Department. So I was not in-house. I was hired through the Art Directors Guild, and most of my work contributed to the physically built sets, so the things they actually built on the backlot, and not so much the VFX environments. And also, most of my work for Obi Wan was on the planet of Tatooine. So. Here's some generic legalese about Disney and Lucasfilm owning all the rights to these images so they don't sue me. And so here's a poster here's some posters of some of my favorite projects that I've worked on over the years. Most of them were matte painting or concept art. So there's many more than this. I think I've done over 20 films at this point in a few series, but we already went through my background, so I won't go through that again. And also let me know if I'm going too fast also.
Oh yeah, you're good. And you know, at any moment I might jump in and want to nerd out on something you're showing. So we'll
absolutely break in at any point.
Be ready. Sure. Yeah, cool.
All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about today is my reference collection, because I'm a good concept artist and that's what I'm supposed to do. When I first came onto the project, or any project, one of the first things that I do is begin collecting photo reference. Because Star Wars design language is such a distinctive, like iconic visual style, I wanted to make sure that I was easily able to adapt to that look, because I've always loved Star Wars, and even though you think you know it, you've got to really kind of isolate those landmarks of what makes Star Wars look like Star Wars, right? A quote from Doug Chang is that you need a strong silhouette, you need the 3-second rule, it's got to have personality, believability, and of course the toy factor. So for me, the first thing that I wanted to do was define some rules. So these are the general Star Wars rules that I've personally found. First, everything has a distinctive, like, used and lived in feel. And that's achieved through a combination of like weathering, rust, scuff marks, which give those objects like a sense of like history and authenticity. The technology of Star Wars really has this like retro futuristic aesthetic, as we all know, and the designs that are inspired by those science fiction movies of the 50s and 60s. And this is really important. What is it? Star Wars is defined by iconic shapes. The design language is characterized by like a number of iconic shapes, such as the TIE fighter, hexagonal wings, and the X-wings and all that, and the dome shapes of like R2-D2. So everything should be really instantly recognizable. And the last rule that I wrote down was that it's the color palette of Star Wars, and the design language is a distinctive color palette of muted earth tones and metallic colors, and that helps create that sense of realism and grounding, not like those like, you know, bright red spaceships of the 50s or whatever. So this is kind of interesting. One thing that I like to do when I start new projects, especially ones that have like such an established look and style as Star Wars, is rewatch those films and take screenshots of the areas of interests to isolate the design language. So you see here, I'm like taking pictures of like doorways and pillars and the buttons. I really want to kind of, those things are actually really important for world building. So you can see here's a small section of background details that I captured from those films. And I find this, I keep that on a monitor, and I find that to be really helpful when I'm working, to kind of focus on the small elements that go into this world to give it its textured or established look. All right, so process. So I thought it'd be pretty cool today to kind of break down a few design challenges that I had for this show. And I thought I'd start with this Cantina that I did because, as a personal note, when I heard that I would get the chance to actually design a Star Wars Cantina on Tatooine for the opening scene of the show, it was like the kid in me was so excited, like a childhood dream, to do something like this in the Star Wars universe. Is like one of the reasons I got into this career in the first place. So it's like amazing to be able to do something that actually exists in the Star Wars world like this. So the first thing I'll talk about is the software that I use. So here's a list of the programs that I use for my personal pipeline. There's a bunch of them. The main program, as we talked about, is 3D Studio Max, and I've been using it since the early days, so I'm really proficient in it. And personally, I just think it's one of the best concept programs out there because of this function that's called the stack that we can talk about if you want. But it's basically working non-destructively on the models in a way that I find really useful for concept art. Kind of like working it the way that you work it with adjustment layers in Photoshop, to where you can go back in the object's history and modify something, and all those changes kind of go all the way up. So that's really cool. And then I use Moi 3D for NURBS modeling. I use 3D Coat for sketching and like quick concept models. I use ZBrush for detail work, Substance Painter for texturing, Marvelous Designer for like fabric stuff. And if I need some generic characters to quickly populate, if I'm doing environment work, I use Daz 3D, and of course, Photoshop. Okay. So for the Cantina, so back in 2018, I was introduced to 3D Coat, and I love it. I think that it's like a really underrated application, or maybe it's not. Maybe a lot of people know about it now, but for the past few years, you don't hear much about it because it allows me to block out designs artistically, and it's all about voxels. You don't need to worry about polygons or edge flow. It's like completely carefree. And you can like cut away, erase, and hide and reveal without worrying about anything technical at all. As a concept artist, that's the app I was missing in my toolbox for years. Because a lot of these other programs, while you're working, you always have to kind of keep half your focus on the technical pipeline of the digital art. But with 3D Coat, I find that app lets me turn off that tech part of my brain and just focus on the design. And I love it. Like, it's so natural when I'm working in it. So yeah, that's my favorite app right now. Because it really allows you to have those happy accidents, and you could pick it up in an afternoon. It's not complex, so it's like a deceptively powerful program that I find myself using more and more. And then talking about the technical, the other thing that I use is Moi 3D, and I do that to make for the NURBS models. So here you can see for the Cantina, this is the circular bar that I created. I made it in Moi 3D. Moi stands for Moment of Inspiration. And it's a great little NURBS modeler for like hard surface tasks. So Moi's great for, it allows me to like keep those nice smooth fillets and keep consistency of design language through if I need everything to be kind of really like perfect. And I find things to do things like this, you can do them, but I find it more challenging in polygonal models than doing it in NURBS. So I just do, if I need something round and smooth with nice smooth cuts on it, I always use NURBS software. And I'm using Moi again here. So this is like a little kit bash of elements that I created for the hanging items above the bar. And so you can see that they maintain all that shape language that I had from the reference collection. And then I assemble all those little pieces into this hanging thing that goes above the bar. And then I quickly unwrapped it and brought it into Substance Painter so that I can get some textures on it. And here's the final piece from like combining all of those guys right there. So that's the NURBS model. Thank you. That's the NURBS model for the hanging item and the bar. Characters are Daz characters with just a lot of Photoshop painting on top. And then the outer structure of the bar is the 3D Coat model. And here's also an overview of that same area, so you can see that same thing. So yeah, that's what I sent production. And then, so after I sent those illustrations to production with the 360-degree bar, I got the note that they wanted to see a more like traditional straight bar option. So that was no problem. I just repurposed all those kit bash elements that I had in Moi and then made a straight version of that. and then brought those elements into Substance Painter. So the really great thing about this pipeline is that you can really just, let's see, and here's the hanging structure further along. But the great thing about this pipeline is that you can, repurpose all this stuff over and over again once you create your own little, kit bash model libraries. So you can kind of see just me working with the textures in there. So those are all the same little elements made in Moi, and just, quickly unwrapped, and then smart materials applied, and then adding a little bit of rust. And then
now, because these are designs for physical set production, are you also handing some of this geo off?
I do sometimes. It didn't happen here. This actually, the final, if you watch the show, they went much simpler than what I provided. So this actually didn't end up in there. But that's fine. You give them what you hope they do, and if a lot of the stuff that I do doesn't make it in, so we'll see that today. Like tons of stuff that I show you guys that actually didn't make it into the series.
That's the job, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, here's that base NURBS mesh for the straight bar created in Moi. And then here's the substance textures on there to give it that aged, used look. Here it is rendered in iRay. And then, and then the last thing that I was going to talk about was the exterior awning that I did for this structure. So there's this fabric awning that I thought was really cool that I also found in the reference from, I think it was, I can't remember which Star Wars film it was, but there was something similar. I think it was Force Awakens that there was a similar red tarp in there. So, so here you can see that I just, at first, for the awning, I polymodeled this simple structure to hold the fabric in place. And then I just placed some tessellated polygons on top of that base structure. And I'm sure all you guys know about Marvelous Desire. But I just imported that object into Marvelous Designer, and then just applied just a few settings to the polygons of how loose the fabric is, and it just automatically drops the fabric in there, and you can like go in and interactively move the fabric around and change the shrinkage of the fabric and see how it kind of goes relaxed there. Just amazing.
That's
I
great.
mean, the truth is I can do this in 2D, right? I could paint this stuff in, but Marvelous Designer is so fun to use that you almost like look for reasons to use it sometimes. It's so awesome to be able to just have all this stuff drop and interactively, adjust the draping and all that. So that's that. And here's, I wanted to show another example of why 3D Coat is so cool. So here's a small example of 3D Coat, how 3D Coat was useful. This is the exterior structure of the Cantina. And I was asked to explore different light design scenarios. In 3D Coat, I was able to quickly just cut away different skylight shapes out of the roof. So here's one roof with straight slats. Here's one with kind of like an array of cutouts, and then one with larger cutouts. And then from there, I just threw in like a 3D sun into a 3D scene using V-Ray and made a small batch of images. And that allowed us to see different light design looks that the different skylight shapes could create. So here's that light design thing that I sent to them. So they, you're giving your production designer lighting options so that you can define the mood and guide the audience's attention to certain areas in the room and really define the space. So I just think that's really cool because yes, I can do this in a regular 3D program, but in a 3D Coat, I can just cut these things out in 5 minutes, export them out and render them in a real time or a GPU render. And in like 20 minutes, I can have all these different lighting scenarios for discussion. So that's something that I think is really awesome. And that's a perfect example of why 3D Coat's really cool. All right, next. So here's just some of the characters that I brought into these scenes. These are just generic characters on Daz, different sitting characters and standing. And the cool thing is just by creating this batch of characters with a similar design since I knew I was doing a bunch of Tatooine work, I can drop these characters into all these scenes and I instantly have people in the scenes so that they're not just empty scenes to sell to the production designer. So that's something that I really recommend if you're an environment concept artist, is to have a library of characters that you can paint on top of. They don't have to be really detailed, but just have some characters in there because it'll kind of help with the scale of the scene and kind of help them see it being lived in versus just an empty backlot or whatever. So here's the final illustrations of that bar. So all that work that went in there, a couple weeks, and then here's those final versions. So here's a white establishing shot of the full exterior. Here's the second one I provided with an outside close-up view under the awning with some characters. Here's that same overview one that I was showing you with the circular bar. And here's the one from behind with the Inquisitor characters approaching in the distance. And here's the straight-on bar that I did also. This is one, I did two different lightings for these. So the front view, it's the rectangular bar with the overhead lights off. And then here's the same image with the overhead lights on. So nice. Two options. Same 3/4 view, same shot, lights, rectangular bar, lights off version, rectangular bar, lights on version. So, I mean, I feel like, you know, as a concept artist, you know this, it's like, it's about giving options to your managers. So you providing as many things that you can in the short amount of time that you have.
I have a question about that. When you get the brief, or this brief in particular, because they're not all going to be the same, did your production designer say, hey, I want the 3/4, I want this option, I want that option, or were you kind of left to your own to say, I think this is going to be some of the best angles I can offer to feature this environment?
On this project, it was during the pandemic, so I was working from home. And so I did a share screen in my 3D program and moved the camera around in the scene. Another reason why 3D is so great for this stuff versus only 2D is because I'm moving the camera around in a gray shaded SketchUp view of the scene, and then he kind of pointed out the different angles that he wanted to see. Yeah,
that's great.
It's sometimes I get to make the choices. Sometimes I do it because I feel like it will be really helpful. Like sometimes they'll explain the shot they want, and I will do that. But I'll stay up late, and I'll also provide a view that I think would be more impactful. And sometimes that actually is really useful because then they're like, oh yeah, that's the angle that we need to do. So I pitch that a lot. I feel like almost like a car salesman. Like, have you thought about this? And then show them
right.
that. Hopefully one of them gets in. So I'm always trying to think one step ahead of what they specifically are asking for, provide what they want, and then provide a little bit extra so they feel like they have a bunch of choices and that they're not narrowed and trapped into the decisions that they've made also.
And I think you said a minute ago that like kind of this whole process you're showing us, because this is always the inevitable question that people ask. You're talking about about a couple weeks worth of work from start to finish.
That's right. Yeah, it was and I think it's been a long time, so I can't remember, but it was. I did spend a lot longer than I normally would have. But you know, there's sketches and things that go in between, and then even side things that happen. So it's hard to judge how long. I tend to go a little bit longer with these things to try to get a more polished look sometimes. I try to maintain doing a lot of key art more than just sketches if I can, because I find that the more lighting and the more detail or the more like cinematic I can get these frames, the more likely it's going to get approved. So it's kind of like this tug of war of like speed versus quality, and I want to find that right match. And if I feel like I can really get it there, I always kind of like push it a little bit.
Yeah, this is the way. So I have kind of a concept art nerd question for myself.
Sure.
Because I'm using 3D on a regular basis to set up shots and do illustration and that kind of stuff. Christian Alsman, I love the way he describes it when he talks about his workflow from 3D to 2D. He calls it painting out the digital. Like, getting rid of that, making it feel more like a painting, even though a lot of the information you've got that feels semi-photoreal, you got from your rendering engine. For you, kind of, and the mentality and how you approach these things, have you found any like best practices in your own methodology that sort of helps you push it from the digital kind of back into what would feel more like a painting?
I don't have, I'm all, it's always about time, and he's right. Like, the more the digital really doesn't help it sometimes. So if you're going to get it further, if you're going to go for realist, you have to get it, past that 90% point in order to sell it, or keep it what I think is more in the like 20-30% finished range, like more sketchy. And that way you get more, you get all that, everything in between. I think it's the 20-80 rule is what it's called. I can't remember what it's specifically called, but everything in between is problematic with your managers because they're not sure what they're looking at. And so, if that answers your question, like, it's like, I'm trying to keep it if it's realistic, then I'm going to push it to this level, which I think is a kind of a far along render. Or if I'm really just trying to get them to get sold on the concept, or if I'm doing some early sketches of this, I really take away that digital look. I'll do outlines on it. I'll paint on top of it, and I'll make it more scribbly so that they don't get lost in that kind of confusing thing. So yeah, Christian's right. He's a master. He knows more than I do at this stuff. So yeah, that's totally true.
Cool. No, this is fabulous. I love seeing the breakdown on this, and we're gonna have to get like a sponsorship from 3D Coat, I think. With all the all the good stuff you're saying about it. And I'm sold. Like we talked about this before the stream. It's like I'm sold. I'm gonna go learn 3D Coat, just seeing the stuff that you're doing with it for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just a big fanboy of that software.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so moving. Oh, here's some shots from the final intro. I forgot I saved some of these. So you can see they really kept the feeling of what's there. I think that maybe I took my illustrations possibly too far because they did not add so much detail, but I'm still happy with the overall shape that they got in there. So pretty cool, like to see this. Like it's pretty amazing.
I mean, it definitely feels like what you did too. I can see where you really, you provided some good art direction for the scenes for sure.
Yeah, so I'm very proud of this one. This is really great, and I mean, also a lot of times when you're doing something, when you get asked to do something that's part of the like intro of a show to set the mood, that feels really, really good. That's a big deal to me because it's like it gets the ball rolling for the rest of the series. So I was really proud of this sequence. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Okay, so that being said, that's kind of the breakdown. Now I can go through some of the other images that I did on Tatooine if you want to see that.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So most of the tasks that I was assigned were on the planet of Tatooine, and this is a collection of some of my favorite images that I did for production. So here's a wide view of the Tatooine city of Anchorhead. And the initial design I was handed to me by a sketch by, I think, Andre Whalen from Lucasfilm, which was really a loose sketch. And so they asked me to develop it further. So as you can see, my process is kind of like similar as a bar, where I create a little kit bash of little buildings in the scene. And then I kind of thoughtfully scatter them around in a way that feels natural. You can see in the top right aerial view, I have that kind of like an avenue going down the center, and then it splits into a Y. So that kind of makes it feel a little bit more lived in than my first pass, which was just scattered buildings everywhere. And then the final image below, production designer Sean Howarth asked me to add a couple spaceship parking lots to it also to break up the monotony. So this is the final image I did for the wide view of the city. Let's see. Okay, then we went down to the street view concept. So here's a street view that I did that ended up in the show. So here's the street concept that I did for this little intersection. And then here's the actual set that they did for the show. So this was also really, satisfying to see on there too. This came really close to the concept.
Yeah. Did you have to are you able to get 3D assets from like Lucasfilm? Did you get those EOPs, or did you have to go model them yourself? Or
so I did get EOPs from them. The EOPs that I got, I think they were from, I forget the name of the cartoon series that they have or something, but the EOPs that I had were very cartoony, and so I ended up taking this, and they were from a PlayStation game or something. So I had to take the model and re-sculpt it in ZBrush to bring it in. So I don't have that image today, but I have a high-res sculpt of the EOP that I did. Oh, you know what? I do have an image of some of the EOPs. I can show that in a second. But just real fast, behind the EOP, you can see this kind of arc, doorway to this building that I designed. And then this is a kind of another render that I did of the same view. And this one wasn't asked for. I just sent it in, and this became kind of the scene for kind of some intense conversations at the beginning of the show. So that was really
that's actually cool. A pretty significant location.
Yeah,
in that first episode.
And I think the reason why they go for it again is like it's iconic, right? You can see it. It's a bold design. It's not like subdued. It's like it's there. It's that half circle. It's there, and it's got a lot of attention to it or something. So
well, you've got that nice Tatooine arch, but I mean, to my eye anyway, there's a little bit of homage to the Imperial windows, right? Like you've got that arched grid coming in, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah, so that was a really kind of cool thing to see. Okay, so here's some. And the other thing that they had me do, which is interesting because not a lot of them got in here, but here are some examples of Tatooine watering holes for street scenes that we were all discussing. So here's this might look this one for this image was designing a watering hole for the Obi creatures on Tatooine. So the idea here is that the creatures would hydrate at troughs built around one of those classic Star Wars evaporators that you could see from the first film. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to mimic that classic hand-drawn markered style from the original Star Wars concept art by Joe Johnston. So I got approval on these sketches to do a more clean look. So here's the final Obi watering hole that I delivered. This was a bummer that it didn't make it into the series. I was really hoping it would make it in, but it's not in the show. So this is the only see it. But you can see here, these are the high res, the low poly Obi models I got. I sculpted on top of those for this shot.
Yeah, and I love the difference between sort of the 3D rendered / sort of drawn or painted over marker sketch type renders that you did. That is so Lucasfilm, like that's so Star Wars to take that approach to it. And it doesn't surprise me. Why they asked
me to take it further too is because
exactly
like that.
Yeah, it's like if Joe Johnston were using 3D in the 70s, like what would it look like? Yeah, awesome.
It's so fun to do that stuff. And for this one, for the fabric, again, I did the draping fabric in Marvelous Designer again. But on this one, I did a process I thought was kind of interesting, to where for the draping fabric, I drew it in Photoshop first, just this black and white silhouette. And then with the selection Photoshop, you can export out splines of that silhouette. And then those splines, I extruded out into polygons. And then in Marvelous Designer, I pinned the corners and then let it drape from there. And the cool thing about that process was that I was able to draw in all these cool little like rips in the fabric too, in the way that I wanted them. So that's how you could see in here, like instead of it just being a solid color up above, you get that like nice like hole in the rooftop or in the fabric. So that was kind of a neat little trick that I did just as an experiment.
I love it too, like when you can budget in the time to take every project that you're doing professionally to give you a little bit of a nudge forward in your own process. Like
that's what I'm doing all the time.
Like
yes.
Yeah. That's part of what keeps it fun.
Absolutely. Keeping it different and then trying new things and trying to improve. Here's a bus stop that they asked me to do. So I did kind of another marker style bus stop where in the series, he takes this kind of floating bus vehicle out, and the idea was that they'd pick him up at maybe this bus stop, but this got cut from the series also. And then another idea was that we'd do an actual human bar on the outside street scene built around an evaporator as well. So here's an evaporator model, just repurposed stuff in NURBS, and then built kind of like a structure around it, you can see on the right. And then here's a couple beauty renders of that thing using the same fabric as the EOB watering hole, just dropping it in there and painting on top of it and dropping in some generic guys in there for scale and then painting some color on the faces and trying to give it some depth. So here's a version 1 and then a version 2 also. So,
man, Alex, I gotta say, like, I'm taking notes because I love the way that you bring your fine art background back into the way that you're painting in the characters, the way that you're taking some of those DAZ models and just like going ham with them. It's really, really great. It feels good.
Yeah. This is I think because of my map painting background, there's just something so satisfying about bringing in these images and making them feel more complete than just ending them at the sketch phase. And so a lot of times I end up trading sleep like off the clock just to get them to where I want them to be. And especially on a project like Star Wars, like, I would have paid to work on that project. So it was like so cool to just be there and do that. And so to be able to like do some pieces that I'm mildly happy with on a project like that, it was kind of a dream come true for me.
Well, and like you said earlier, like per Doug Chang's, advice and leadership, Star Wars is all about silhouette. Star Wars is very graphical. It has a very graphic read. So even like taking what you're doing and even comparing it to like some of the early Ralph McQuarrie paintings, it's almost like there's this less is more quality.
Sure.
Like if you zoom way in on some of these characters, I'm sure that there's like full on brushstrokes there, but you give just enough of that silhouette and then the secondary and tertiary elements, and like it all just snaps into place.
Yeah.
Because you've got that great lighting that you set up. And I'm sorry, I'm gushing over it because it's the kind of stuff I nerd out on this every day. I just think this stuff is awesome.
Yeah, I wish all the projects could be like this. They're
sure.
Cool. Okay, so this is a couple other random ones. This was actually useful on the top left because that's the street scene that you saw in the footage or in the the shots from the show. Those were actually used. They built those. So those on the top left was built. And then these are just some other beauty rend. So I did those because they needed to get some ideas for the street. So on the top is the right side of the street, and on the bottom is the right and left side of the street, both sides of the street. So they actually made those. I think those are pretty accurate to what was actually built. And then these are just some suggestions of camera angles and beauty renders around it of different areas of the same model. So just you create a kit bash of a lot of the elements, and then make some beautiful scenes with them so that they can, maybe it gets their juices flowing when they're like trying to figure out what to do with them and stuff. So there's that. Here's another bar shop idea that I had. We were talking about maybe doing this. Another one around I love the evaporators, putting them in everything. Yeah. Especially if it's like a place where you're going to get some, alcohol or liquids, like maybe you use that in the process of doing it. So it's all built around there, and same process as the other bars, just creating a quick, simple piece of geometry, cutting them away in 3D coat, and then like building them around elements in there, and then Substance Painter, and then Photoshop on top. Okay, so next, am I going too fast or too slow?
No, I think it's just right. You're doing great.
All right, so here's something a little bit different. For here, they asked me to try and design kind of like a mobile, almost golf cart-like vehicle for the Jawa character in the series. So I was referencing the Jawa Sandcrawler from the first Star Wars, and I wanted the vehicle to have that appearance of being constructed from salvaged parts, like scrap metal and whatnot. And I also wanted to have like an open cockpit with a driver's seat position in the front of the vehicle. So here are my first initial 3D sketches that I took too far again. For production as suggestions. So here's the first one. This is version A. Version A again from above. I thought it'd cool to have like this little trailer of his junk inside there.
Absolutely, that's great.
And then another version A, and this one's kind of a long shot.
I love this one because it feels like the way that A New Hope was filmed.
Yeah,
you get that long shot. There's that little bit of like distortion at the bottom.
Yeah. And the depth of field. And that actual creature is something that I pulled from Wikipedia that's actually on Tatooine. So that was kind of like a little Easter egg for Doug. Hopefully he noticed that when I sent it over. So that was version A. Here's the version B version. So this one's a little bit like a little tank crawler. Thought that was cool. Another aerial view. So I try to give him a few shots, especially since 3D and kind of using a GPU render like V-Ray. It's pretty fast to do this stuff. So there's a couple views, and this is the version C, and this is the one that they liked the most. And so this one I spent more time on, and I modeled the body in NURBS, and then the wheels are like little kit bash elements, and then so there's that. Here's a couple other views of that one, an action shot of the same version C.
That's cool.
And this one I did specifically because I wanted to have some of that sunlight going through the dust being kicked up from the sand. Like that was in my mind. I wanted to do that so really bad. So I did this version, and then a side view, a plan view, so they could see the full thing, and up or a top view. And so I did this image to show the process for the little piece of that. And this one's a little bit overkill also. You can see on the yellow piece in the first panel, I made that I blocked out the main shape in Moi 3D. And then I brought it and then quickly exported an OBJ out to 3D coat and then cut out the holes. And I played around with cutting them out and like moving them around so I can kind of sketch on top of that main shape. Then I brought it into ZBrush because I have a bunch of alphas that I have in ZBrush for tech stuff. So I put a bunch of the bolts in there. And then lastly, bring it into Substance and then spit it out. So it seems like a lot, but I'm so fast in this process now, like something like this is a half an hour. So it's not like a crazy thing for me to go through this, but just having the knowledge of those different programs, it's just kind of like a fun little learning opportunity too, to try out different work.
Well, and it keeps you hopping. It keeps you from getting bored, just staying in one discipline too.
Totally.
Like you kind of hop through different things. Yeah.
Okay, so in the end, they liked that version C, and I thought I was going to get in, but I think because of budget, they cut it out. But they kept the little cart in the back only. So that's what ended up in the show. So that's what I'm super proud of, is this little tiny cart thing. But yep, there's that. And then here's some views of the alley run sequence. So here we got, they asked, the opening sequence of the show was originally going to start with them running through Anchorhead or Tatooine with the Jedi running from the Inquisitorius, the bad guy characters. And so he's running through. So I did that marker sketch style again, because I was able to do that faster than the regular rendering stuff. And then production designer said he wanted to see some key shots of a few of the panels. So here are the panels that I did. They're key to kind of set the mood in there. So here's the first one. Another one similar with the person chasing them above on the roof. And then one more with them turning a corner, just to kind of show that we can kind of get the red light from those kind of fabric hanging items above or whatever. So trying to just do more scenes in that desert style. Next, this is a shot for the Dead Jedi sequence. So there was a scene where the Jedi was killed and was put on display up on one of the arches. So here you can see on the top, I provided them with a few different archway shape options showing how the Dead Jedi could be mounted to the structure. And then I did a handful of key art pieces just for a different angle and lighting and mood and whatnot. So there's the first one. There's a second one a little closer and lower. And then one with a longer lens. And then this is how it ended up looking in the final shot. So pretty close.
Wow. Yeah.
I think it came across it from that one. So pretty proud of that. Let's see. Final. Oh, and mine. So here's a non-desert. Here's a few non-desert images for once I made of the mining camp on the planet Mapuzo, where Obi Wan faced Darth Vader for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
So here's an aerial view of the mining camp that I did. It felt so good to not be doing sand for a minute. Really cool. The original buildings designs, I got little SketchUp models from Lucasfilm. So I scattered those around, textured them, and then also we had a aerial scan of the actual land that they built the set on. So I used that and then scattered plants and textured that. So I was able to, you'd have the same property that you would have the actual set on. So we could figure out where it would go. So that was really helpful, to have all that data to be able to kind of mess around with it. Here's a view of the reverse angle. And you could see like the idea is that we would use that set and it would be set extension up above. So you could see all the housing up above of the mining structures and the, how some more of those like strange mountains up there on top, dome shapes, to kind of give it a little bit more impact. So there's the street level and then one more aerial view from the reverse angle. So
I love how you I'm getting like strong like Edo Japanese village vibes from the way that you laid out because they got sort of a Japanese shape to them.
Yeah, or
the buildings
also like maybe a Western too, a little bit, like the avenue.
Oh, for sure, yeah. It's sort of it's that Akira Kurosawa. Like, is it a Western? Is it a samurai movie? It's like it's both. Like, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I was pretty proud of those, and it was a really nice kind of break from Tatooine. And here's how it ended up in the final. So I think it looks okay, pretty cool, nice. Let's see. I wish they would have gone with up above and did all that kind of crazy mountains.
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's see.
They were like, we need to spend how much to do that?
Yeah. That's the problem is I always, everything that I have has $1 million price tag attached to it. So I'll close with the gallery. I'll close with some of the key art pieces that I did of the Fortress Inquisitorius. And these were mostly explorations of lighting and scale. And most of this visual development was done based off of the overall fortress design done by the guys at Lucasfilm. So if you don't know, the Fortress Inquisitorius is the secret stronghold of the Inquisitorius, which is a group of dark side force users who worked for the Galactic Empire to hunt down and eliminate any surviving Jedi after the events of Order 66. That's according to Wikipedia. Here we go. These are some key art images I did for lighting to nail down the lighting, the scale, and the tone of the structure. And so I was really pushing a dark and stormy look. I thought it'd be cool to make this thing look really scary and kind of like imposing. I think we ended up going in the end with a more gray, kind of like daytime foggy look, but I really thought it was cool. It would be cool to have this like nighttime look to everything. So here's a wide front view. Here's a top-down view of the same area. You see the shuttle, kind of a shuttle approach from the top down. And here's a reverse shot from behind the shuttle. See how you can see I have the storm kind of in there, and then a nice lens flare to kind of give this kind of stormy feel. Really giving attention to mood on these. And then a wide view, and then a view of the landing platform. So built mostly in 3D Studio Max, I think. I don't think I used a lot of NURBS for here. And I used a plugin for the floor called Rail Clone, which is great for building structures using parametric, like procedural tools instead of modeling stuff out. So on this one, all I had to do was create a spline of the shape and then create a couple tiles next to each other, and it would fill in that spline with the floor.
That's awesome.
So I could have done texture, but also it was nice to have the model, because then I could, change the model really quickly, right there, and get all the different shapes. And let's see, and then 3D coat for the rocky walls out there on the sides.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite things about the design of this location is the way that you handled the stone on the inside. Inside walls and stuff like that. It's
something
beautiful.
Natural. Yeah. That credit's got to go to Andre Whalen for that design, because his initial design had that, and I really love that also. It really gives this kind of like this not like an extra little bit to the design. It's so beautiful. Let's see, and then and then a platform view near the shuttle. I really like this shot because I'm trying to push the scale, make the ceiling feel really really high up, and have all the TIE fighters kind of stored up above. And then a view from the TIE fighters looking down with the rain kind of pouring outside. I thought that'd be cool as kind of like an umbrella kind of thing.
It almost looks like that TIE fighter camera left is like a little rusty too. Like
I put that on. Yeah, that's
saltwater air.
Sometimes I get a little bit like too much blue in the scene, and then I'm just like, I got to add some warmth into there somewhere to add something, because it becomes almost too monotone sometimes, right? So you're trying to add that color variation for just for like visual like vibration of the different warm and cools, right?
Totally.
And then a floor level view looking at the doorway. That's specifically for the doorway, and then a shuttle. So and here's kind of some turntables that I sent them as I was modeling this thing out. So that you can kind of get a sense of scale. So this is, I throw a couple stormtroopers in there to really show how big this thing is. Because it's kind of hard when you deal with things at this scale. It's hard to convey that size. So,
absolutely. Well, and these are also vehicles and stuff that we're used to looking at. I've found sometimes that if you're not careful, if you don't get that relative scale, it can start looking like a toy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's that view. So this is the floor level view, and then next is, and this is a more further out view, so they get a scale of the whole entire thing. So it's a pretty heavy model, but I did it pretty efficiently, and especially using the procedural tools, you're able to get a lot, get away with a lot fast.
Yeah, that's great for presentation. That's really awesome. I love it.
And I think that's it. Okay, so that is it. I want to say thank you that's just a closing on there. But this last image, I was going to say, I wanted to finish this image with one question. And I was going to say that everyone knows that there's two suns on the planet of Tatooine. But if there are two, why is there always only one shadow in the Star Wars films? Shouldn't it look more like this? Right? So,
it should, but it's space fantasy, not space science fiction.
Absolutely.
No, but I've thought about that so many times, and I've even played around with that in 3D. Like I've got a really nice plugin in Blender that will literally set up twin suns for you, with a full atmospheric sky. And I've pushed it sometimes, and you wind up with those two shadows, and it's like, oh, but it doesn't look like it's in camera Star Wars anymore because it's too scientifically accurate.
Right. Can't be that accurate.
Yeah. No, that was really, really cool. And I think one of the bonuses that I wasn't anticipating is just the vast usage of the different tools that you're using. kind of moving from one thing to the next, which I'm sure that you are doing that for efficiency and survival and trying to keep things moving along. But it was kind of like a little mini masterclass in process, which is really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, we've had some questions coming in the chat. And by all means, guys, feel free to continue to type your questions and stuff like that. But I think we'll jump into that. And then, if there's time, we might nerd out just a little bit more. I have some questions in the back pocket about your process and what you do that I'd love to ask too. So first question we're going to jump on is asked by Kahuna Virus. I gotta love these screen names.
Yeah.
Screen names are one of my favorite things about doing live streams. What kind of work is done on top of the render to give it that hand-painted ethereal look?
I mean, there's a lot of tricks to doing that kind of stuff. I know some people use a plugin called Acviz, which has an automatic oil paint AI oil paint filter on there. And what they do is they do that oil paint, and then they bring back they do that as a layer on top of the 3D render, and then they bring back the opacity so that it just you get the sense of paintbrush strokes, but you still see what's below on there. So that's one thing you could do. Some people tend to get rid of the CG look by using in Photoshop, I believe it's still in there, called this smart blur. And that gets rid of a lot of that photographic kind of noise and detail that's in the photo, and gets it to be more graphical in the colors. And then you paint on top of that. For me, what I like to do is I'm a big proponent of using not just the regular brush in the images, but I use the mixer brush in Photoshop all the time, almost more than the regular brush, because I like it to feel more like an oil painting. So a lot of the times I break up the edges and everything using a mixer brush tool. And the mixer brush is actually, I don't know, I use a tablet, not a video tab, not the Cintiq, but an actual tablet. But if you use the art pen from Wacom when you're doing concept art, the art pen includes rotation in its stylus. So if you're using the mixer brush with the art pen, you can rotate your brush strokes and get some really nice oil paint looking strokes in there that will feel a lot more natural than just the regular standard Photoshop round brush.
Yeah, no, I keep an old Wacom art pen around for exactly that reason.
Yeah, I love it.
Don't know why they haven't kept rotation as a part of the feature, because you can get that great sort of palette knife sort of thing going on.
Absolutely, yeah. It's amazing.
Awesome. Next question is from Emmanuel Shu. Sorry, it's not a question. Emmanuel is just showing some serious love in the chat, so just wanted to give a shout out to Emmanuel for keeping the hype going and keeping the love flowing.
Everyone should check out Emmanuel Shu's portfolio if you don't know who he is. Also, he's probably one of the most talented people in the concept industry. Also,
wonderful work. Next one is from Rogue Duck, asking, were the sketches for the watering hole paintovers of 3D models?
They were, yes. Yeah,
I think they're talking about the ones that you gave sort of that Joe Johnston treatment to.
Yeah.
So I want to unpack that one a little bit more, because that's one of the things I wanted to nerd out on.
Sure.
When you're setting, and I actually, I think at the tail end of last year, I did a live stream with Anton Grandert, and we were talking about exactly the same thing. And what he did was, he used a rendering engine just to give you the outline, right? And maybe some basic shading. But then he went into Photoshop and actually made his own brush that felt like the strokes that they were giving in the rendering engine, and then did like draw overs and additions and stuff.
That's what I do also.
Okay, yeah. So you're kind of like getting that sort of minimum viable product out of your rendering engine.
Absolutely.
And then you're adding additional drawing and so forth on top of it.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's actually, I think it's a beautiful way to work. Like,
I want to do that a lot more. I think it's successful. One thing is, like I'm working on the new Aliens film right now, and I got to be careful not to make things too Star Wars. So if I need to come up with styles that reflect that kind of style, because Star Wars has a tendency to like, I don't want to say infect other design styles in these other worlds. So you have
100%, yes.
You have to be very cognizant to not let that kind of design to do the right style in the right world, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and Star Wars has had such an influence, I think, on so many other iconic sci-fi languages. Like it doesn't look like Star Wars, but Star Wars had something about the sensibility of it or something like that had an influence on it that if you haven't fully sort of like cleansed your palate as a designer when you move from Star Wars to something else, like it just carries right over.
Right.
Comes
Absolutely.
right with you. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. All right, so we've got a little bit of time, guys. If you want to get a few more questions in, and my co-pilot will feed those questions my way. But I wanted to ask, and I gotta believe that for certain projects, like you talk about that 80-20 rule, like sometimes you're doing 20% of the work in 3D and then you're pushing it there, or you're doing 80% of the work in 3D and you're kind of giving that 20% polish at the end. For you, how much do you find that you get to incorporate your 2D skill set into your 3D work?
Well, the thing is, I'm always wanting to do more of the 2D work. I love drawing. I find that it's almost like people think that they want the 2D, but they really don't, because they want to move the camera and they want to move it around. So it's very scary to commit to the 2D stuff, knowing that there might be a 3D change or an overall change into the thing. So, I mean, I do as much 2D as I possibly can. Well, sorry, what was the question though?
Oh no, just like how much of your 2D do you get to bring in? And are there
so
certain types of projects where you get to do more 2D or vice versa?
It changes. So I for the most part, if I feel like it needs to be 3D, and I kind of get a read on the production designers, or the directors, I really kind of feel it out to see what they want. If they're open to the 2D stuff, I'll always at the beginning of a project try to do mostly 2D at the beginning and see if they're into it, because they say that they want it. So I'll sketch some of the stuff. But in the end, I kind of get this vibe that they don't want it all 2D. So I end up being more 3D, but I definitely try to get it more in. So I'd say for the most part, it's 80% 3D nowadays and 20% 2D. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense. But I mean, at least for some of the pieces you're showing us tonight, I love the way that you obviously probably burnt the midnight oil to do it on some occasions, but the way you brought the painting into the 3D render, and it just gives it that more like that classic Star Wars concept art vibe, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, something else I like to talk with artists about when we get to have folks such as yourself on the stream is, and we were talking about this, I think, before the call today, there's a lot of younger artists out there that are aspiring to work in concept art. And I think concept art it's become very popularized. Like a lot more people know about concept art now as the thing that you can do in the entertainment industry. But I think there also sometimes is a lot of misinformation out there about what you need to do to become a concept artist. So I'm not saying you have to unpack all of that, but considering that we could have people watching the stream ranging from 14 years old to 25 to 30 who are really working hard, that are wanting to put the time in, but maybe don't know where to put the time in. To develop their craft, to make themselves hireable as a concept artist. What advice would you have to somebody who's more on the aspirational side of wanting to get into this?
Man, it's such a broad question.
I know.
So much.
Well, and I'm not asking you to fill in all of those gaps, but I was sort of setting it up to say, what would you say to someone who's like, man, Alex, I want to do what you do, but I'm at the beginning of my journey and I don't know what to spend my time doing to prepare myself.
I mean, it's all about the foundations in my mind. Like, when I'm looking at artwork, I can go to the art, or an art gallery. I want to go look at those still lifes and I want to see the traditional art. Like in the end, like if you can paint, a bird on a dock amazingly, you can also paint a spaceship flying through the sky. And so it's really a matter of learning that boring stuff, meditating on the things that make art, understanding the stuff that seems like it's a waste of time at the beginning, the color theory, the masters. I just got the new Frank Frazetta book delivered today, and I'm like going to sit there and just stare at that work for a couple hours tonight. So it's really a matter of like learning those foundations that that you can build upon, right? Because one of the greatest things I learned from an art teacher, heard from an art teacher, is that your first 10,000 paintings are going to be terrible. So you might as well get started now. So just start working, learn the foundations, and grow from those foundations and build all that other stuff. The concept art to me is just an extension of years and years of all the other foundation things that I learned. Like I still think back to the portrait classes that I took and the illustration classes that I took as a kid, and the color theory and all of, line quality and all that stuff that you really got to take your time to learn, because they really do apply to your career all the way through photography and all that stuff. So my advice to anyone that wants to be a concept artist is, start at the beginning. Don't try to jump the line. Don't do a bunch of AI prompt filters and paint on top of that. Don't do, don't start with photo bashing. Like, actually enjoy the process. Like they say, the process is the reward, or the journey is the reward, they say, right? So go through and like start at the beginning and learn those mistakes and make those terrible paintings, because there's a certain point that just switches. Like, I can tell you right now that when I took a portrait class and when they had me paint white pencil on a black piece of paper, everything switched for me in painting. Like, that was the one moment that changed. And if you don't spend that time learning that kind of foundational stuff, you're not going to get those aha moments that switch it over. You're just going to learn a bunch of buttons and filters and things like that. So it's real, like, those foundations are like, that's what you want in your life. And also when you get older, as you know, like, you don't have time to do that stuff. So spend that free time learning the photography, learning all that stuff, getting into it and learning it is like the most important stuff for me personally.
I love your answer, but I also love the way that you unpacked it, because I think a lot of people misunderstand pointing back to the foundational things as like, well, do it so you can have your badge of honor that you did it, and then do it the easy way. It's like what people forget is that journey you just described actually changes the artist.
100%.
It changes you. It changes the way that you communicate. It requires a certain kind of growth to give yourself permission to make bad looking paintings.
Right.
When you're learning all of those things, I think then that stays with you. And when you are using 3D to get something done quickly, and maybe you're not doing as much of the foundational style painting, your eye's already trained. You know what you're looking for. How to get the idea across without chasing your tail for 5 hours.
And that's very real. That's so real in concept art. Like, you're sitting there and you are like, you feel this job is a painful job. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Like, a lot of these guys are going to come up here and say that, like, it doesn't come out like a tube of toothpaste. You don't just give them quality. You give them terrible work, and then then you finally get it. And it's so excruciating to get to that point. And all of those foundations are what let you get to that point. So that's a real, that's one thing that people really should think about, is like, there's no button or anything. This is like everything that we do. I like to say that, concept art is a conversation, right? It's more about your conversation with the people that you're working with and getting what they want out. It's not about just saying, here's a great thing, this is what it is. Like, then it never gets there. So it's really a matter of like learning all of those tools. Like, communication is way more important in this field than just being able to render really good in V-Ray. Like, all these weird things that no one mentions ever are the actual value of what you actually need. So,
or I mean, sometimes the opposite happens. Like, you do something that's maybe it's some of your best work, maybe it's something you're really proud of, that's amazing. You feel like you push yourself to a new height executing this piece, and it's like, we don't like it, or we're not going to use it, or
happens all the time.
We're taking it out. So it's like, if you're addicted to that being the payoff, that they say that it's great and they want to use it, like, don't be a concept artist. But if you can, and I think the reason why I'm kind of going on about this is the way that you unpack the idea of, like, it's not learning it so that you can say, I know this and this is my totem. It's learning it because of how it affects you going through that process. You learn to enjoy the process,
right?
Not just the outcomes. And I think that's what keeps me coming back for more anyway. Like, even if nobody else wants to use the piece, it's like, oh, I already got everything that I need out of doing this piece because I did it. Okay, we've had a couple more questions come in.
Sure.
Got another one from Kahuna Virus. Love that name. whoever you are. It's fantastic. How much of the plot is revealed to you when you are tasked to design an environment? It's like, how much do you know about Obi Wan when you're working on this
That's
stuff?
interesting. So Obi Wan, they did, because I wasn't in the Lucasfilm art department in house. A lot of that was kind of went through a lot of strange back channels or through very cryptic descriptions of what things were. And I got some tasks, and then some tasks I got tasked to take away because they didn't want it out in public. You know, there's a million eyeballs trying to get views of a lot of these projects. It's like top secret for a lot of them. So I totally get it. But for Star Wars, not a lot was there, or just what I needed to know to get what was done. And then I had to kind of hope that it was what they wanted. For other projects, for like the one I'm on right now, for instance, they give me the script. I know what the movie is, and I know everything that's there. And all that does is get a better product for your clients, right? Because you know more, you're getting as much information. Your goal is to be like in tune with the director or with the production designer. So the more information that you get, the better quality, the better product they're going to have. And so I can only deliver what they give to me, basically. So sometimes it's a lot, and sometimes it's very, very little. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's got to be hard when it's Star Wars and you know so little.
Yeah, like what happened? When does he meet Vader? When does he fight Vader?
Right. Because I need to know that for this building, so you just have to tell me.
Right.
But yeah, we got another question from Rogue Duck. If you get stuck on a design, what do you do to progress? Any specific things for inspiration, or like if you're, like when you're a professional, you don't get to show up and go, I'm not feeling it today, so I'm going home. It's like,
which happens too, right?
Yeah, you got to push through it. So
yeah,
what have you made any discoveries for yourself to help you when you hit those walls?
I mean, maybe some great artists so other people I'm sure are really good at. I go through hell and back to get to these points. Like sometimes I get in these holes that I just cannot get anything out. And I have these days, and I lie on the couch and I stare at the ceiling. I pull out books and try to get inspired again. I watch videos. I start sketching. The one thing that really helps actually is, knowing all these tools, like I showed. Like, it may seem like a lot of software programs to use, but again, like 3D code, like I could pull up a clay and cut away a bunch of things and make some random stuff. And then there's like kind of a library of tools that I have in my mind that are like tricks on my mind to kind of force it out. And so one of those is, obviously most concept artists know this, is to do the silhouette method. So you create silhouettes and cut away and try to find something that reads as a silhouette and then build up from there. So you can do these kind of things that build up the creativity to get it to where it needs to go, versus going full on down a path that you already know that you want to, of what you want to do. So one thing that you could do if you're a 3D concept artist, like in 3D Code or in 3D Studio Max, one thing that I found is sometimes I do 3D in silhouette. So in the viewport, I'll give a no lighting viewport with a black material on it, and I'll model and I'll throw shapes around in a viewport, and that only show the silhouette, so I can model in silhouette and move things around, move the camera around, and make sure it reads from all those angles. And then your mind fills in those gaps, and then you can paint on top of that. Screen capture it and paint on top of that viewport and get something there too. Or just traditional, silhouette painting, playing around with different brushes. Sometimes I just buy packs of brushes and then, splatter them on a canvas and see, and that kind of gets the creative juices flowing also. It's really like this weird trick of the mind. Like your mind is like saying, I don't want to do this. And you're like, well, here's a million things. You got to get it done, do it. And then, so yeah, that's the process.
Would you say it's like a Jedi trick of the mind?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's funny though, because I can very much identify with what you're saying. It's like, it can feel very despairing when your brain or your heart or whatever it is not cooperating with you. But then it's funny how all it takes is like the littlest little nudge just in the right place at the right time, and then suddenly it comes back,
Yep. Yeah.
But when you're going through that, you feel like it's never going to happen again.
Yeah,
ever,
terrible. And the pressure builds up too, because concept art is not this thing where you have like all this time to do this and then you just deliver it and it gets done. You have you have a production designer, you have the entire production is a giant working machine, and all eyes are on you to get these designs so that they can move forward. A set designer needs to know what it looks like, and so you also feel that pressure all the time to deliver on what they need. So I'm the last person to say that it comes easy to me. It's a daily challenge that I feel like eventually will just cause a heart attack. But yeah.
Well, another concept artist whose work I really love, and also an instructor at Gnomon, Jared Krzyzewski, talks about peaks and valleys. You know, that it's like if you're at a peak, there's a valley's gonna come. Like you can't stay up there forever. But that has, over time, that became encouraging to me, because usually when I'm at that point of frustration where it's like everything I do sucks, I can't stand it, I'm not growing, I can't do what I want to do, I'll just stop and be like, oh, this is good news, because it means that like just right around the corner, if I'll just stay there, if I'll just hang in there, there's another peak coming. And sure enough, something happens and you execute a thing and you're like, oh wow, like it all came together for me.
Right.
It's like you just have to trust that process. That
right. That's good to know.
This is not the end, you know.
From my point of view, I'm stuck in that valley a lot, and there's no ups ever again. That's it forever.
Well,
my wife would say, "Shut up,"
but peaks are a lot smaller than valleys, right? Just by nature of the shape. So it's like, yeah, the valley is not a quick little jaunt you have to go through. But yeah, no, I think in an age where there is a lot of instant gratification, where there is this sort of this dopamine addiction to having to share something on social media every day, having to output, having to everything I do has to be great. It's really, I find it to be, I'm not saying social media is toxic, but I'm saying that loop we get ourselves into sometimes can be very toxic to creativity, because now you're censoring your work, you're not creating anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Alex, we're kind of at time, and I want to thank you for taking the time today. This is certainly, like, it could have just been us talking about concept art, and I would have had a great time.
That was great.
Yeah, thank you for everything you shared with us, and I hope we get to do something again on the Gnomon live stream with you in the future. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. And this, of course, will be available as video on demand on our YouTube channel, as well as on our Twitch channel as well. So yeah, head back, check it out. I'm going to definitely be reviewing a couple of things myself, especially when I start jumping into 3D Coat. But yeah, this has been massively inspiring. So I can't wait to go make some art. Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Norman. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.